The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
It's not the weight of the eel, it's the quality. Oh.
Good morning, CHD. I'm thrilled to be live, and I'm here with Pierre Kory, and we are going to talk about how minerals are missing in most of our lives and what they might be able to provide to our plants, our animals, and ourselves, and how they might also clean up our drinking water. So let me turn it over right now to Pierre to talk about what he has learned, what he's discovered. He says he has stood on the shoulders of giants and is now very interested in this subject. I too am interested in it. Let me just say one thing. In the last few days, I have listened to a talk by David Brownstein, who says that everybody is short of iodine. Not everybody, but he lives in Michigan, and Michigan, there's not much iodine in the soil and the water of Michigan. Iodine usually comes from the ocean. Michigan is not near the ocean. And so he is taking 75 milligrams of iodine a day himself. His daughter is taking 50 milligrams. And another doctor who was at the Zoom said, when I went to medical school 40 years ago, one of the old professors gave me a piece of paper that said, if you don't know, if you have a patient, you don't know what's wrong with them, and it's very puzzling, try iodine. So that's just one of these minerals. Now, Michael Nels, who's an MD PhD from Germany, wrote a very interesting book. And among the things he talks about in that book is the fact that lithium is missing. Now, you know, lithium is used for manic depressive illness, now called bipolar, but at high doses, maybe 300 milligrams at a time. He says that maybe we all need 3 milligrams, 1/100th of that, which can soothe our brains and maybe have other effects. So, having been told recently that iodine and lithium are probably deficient in the food and water I'm getting, I was very interested to hear that Pierre has a more comprehensive list of all these elements, all these minerals that we may be missing, trace minerals at very low amounts, in part because we ignore them because they're only used in a very few enzymes. They're cofactors of enzymes in our body, but they're not needed at high quantities, so they tend to be ignored by nutritionists and everybody else. And so, Pierre, why don't I just let you get started, and I'll interrupt you with questions as you go.
Yeah, please do, because I could probably rattle off a half hour. I'm so impassioned on this topic. But, to your point, Meryl, this came to me, through my work. I left the system and I opened a private practice, and I've been largely focused on treating those with long vax or long COVID. And it's a very complex idiosyncratic disease. And my 3.5 years in practice has really been a search for therapies. You talk to doctors trying to treat this and figure it out. Everyone's got a suggestion of this works, that works, the other thing. You and I have had chats. You've done a lot of good nutrition recommendations for me, which I've incorporated. But we're constantly researching, and I call it going down, rabbit holes. And I just wrote a book on chlorine dioxide. It's called The War on Chlorine Dioxide. That was one therapy that I immersed myself for a year in learning about. Um, and through that work and that network of folks that I got to interview and interact with came the minerals. And I will just say at the outset, Meryl, that what I know about minerals, what I know about this particular extract of minerals that was achieved by Asao Shimanishi in the 70s, um, is probably the most transformative event of my career. And I think it's going to dictate my future, actually. I am completely enthralled with what I'm learning about the potential for these minerals to restore health, not just in humans. We're talking about anything, any biological system. from a microbe to water that gives some energy to mostly plants, soils, animals, and humans. And then obviously, as I was first attracted to the mineral extract. That was what I was first. But then as I started to research about minerals in general, a lot of the first things I'm going to say, I know you already know, because when we talked the other day, you're like, oh yeah, but let me just kind of lay out some of the big building blocks which form this book. So as I'm starting to look into minerals, I find out the following. Number one, trace mineral depletion in our soils, which began in like the late 1800s, has been decreasing ever since, and it's going more rapidly. Like in the last 20 years, the reduction far out exceeds the prior reductions of the prior, like I think 100. Those numbers are a little off, but you get what I'm trying to communicate. So number one, we got a problem here. And it's not just a problem in the US, it is worldwide. The agricultural practices have been adopted across the globe that are constantly depleting ourselves of microbial diversity and therefore minerals. And then I learned about what
Let me
happened.
throw
Yeah,
in, let me
yeah,
interrupt. So what happens is that the fertilizers that are being placed on our soils are focused on NPK,
yep.
nitrogen, potassium,
Phosphorus.
and
Yeah.
phosphorus. And they tend to ignore, they don't measure, they don't care about trace elements, or lesser important elements. And so therefore, those things can make plants grow, but the plants do not carry these trace elements that provided that form of nutrition for us.
It's like a competitive absorption, Meryl. They get so much of those three that they absorb those, somewhat exclusively, and they do not take in that more broad, diverse mineral composition they used to. And by the way, human nutrition, where do we get our food? It's from the soil, through plants, and then the animals that eat those plants. So we're all connected, right? And so that trace mineral depletion, I like some of the little factoids like to meet the nutritional quality of a carrot from 1950, you'd have to eat like 4 to 5 carrots now, and you're talking about like, and so that was like number one. Then number two, and this is where it gets really interesting. And I liked your intro or your interjection about lithium and what was the other mineral you? Oh,
Iodine.
iodine. Yeah. So I'm going into these minerals, and the complex that I'm studying has up to 80. And I learned that in our soils, no one knows the exact number, but it's about 70 to 90 minerals and elements. What's the difference between a mineral and an element from the periodic table? A mineral is a complex of typically maybe a couple of elements, whereas an element is just a single atom unit. And so but elements are also physiologically active in our bodies, and the diversity that's supposed to be in the soil, or that has been studied in terms of being essential for human health, you're literally talking about 14 minerals out of about 80 that could be important to our functioning. So all of nutritional science and biomedical research has literally myopically focused on 14 minerals. And then I started asking questions like, who determined what is essential? I love that you brought up Nels, right? Because when I read that thing about lithium on Nels, in fact, you probably saw I have a section in my book about Nels and lithium. I was really intrigued by that, and he calls it an essential mineral. But guess what? He's the only guy calling it that. Science, right, with a big S, does not consider lithium to be an essential mineral. And so I started digging deep into like when did we come up with essential versus non-essential? And it started like in the early last century, like late 1940s, like the first kind of dietary allowances that came out. Essential has a definition. It's something we need 100 milligrams of a day or more, whereas trace is something you need much, much less of. So there are seven major minerals, which are, hopefully I can rattle them off. So it's chloride, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur,
Manganese.
manganese. No, that's a trace. Manganese is a trace. The majors are
Iron.
no, iron is also a trace, oddly, but yeah, sulfur, phosphorus, chloride, magnesium. I don't know. I'm trying to remember all my minerals, but anyway, the point is that there's seven major and seven minor or trace minerals, and the seven minor. Hopefully, you and I can get these. So it's iron. It is zinc. We have manganese, selenium,
Iodine.
copper. copper iodine, if I didn't mention it. So that's like six. I'm probably missing the seven, but boron's not on there. Lithium's not on there. And those can be, I mean, the impacts of just boron supplementation on various conditions can be really quite dramatic. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay. And then I discover something else, which was mind blowing, which is that the ability to measure the vast majority of that list of 80 minerals, trace minerals, rare earth elements didn't exist until 1989. It's something called ICP-MS, which is a mass spectrometer. And so basically, we cruised right past this whole diversity of minerals in our soil in terms of researching, in terms of its physiologic or biological importance. So then I start to find out that after ICP-MS came about, I said, where's all the research, looking for the physiologic impacts of these individual elements and minerals? And it's not there. The entire body of research on these more rarer or what I call ultra trace elements is literally directed almost again another myopically around toxicity. So when they're mining and doing different industrial things in the soil, they'll break out the mass spectrometers to measure potentially toxic levels. So they're only looking at toxicity, not at necessity. And I think my book, part of the message is like it's calling out like, are you sure we got this essential and non-essential right? How many things are we missing from our well-being that aren't being recommended or focused on? And I love how you made that mention of like when you don't know what's wrong with someone, give them some iodine. That's just as a clinician, as a fellow clinician, Meryl. I mean, I love that kind of stuff. You know what I found, which blew me away and humbled me like you wouldn't believe. But I was researching about hydration, and I came across a study, and this is where I was like humbled, that they did a study of elderly patients with altered mental status, right? One of the most common pages you'll get as an ICU doctor or an internist in a hospital. And my whole career, I've had to evaluate patients with altered mental status. And I had mnemonics that were really good. I covered maybe all the major bases. First is actually you check the medication list, right? Because that's like, that's
Right.
probably the number one, two, and three causes of altered mental status. But in this study, they said that 1/3 of altered elderly resolved after hydration. And I'm sitting there like, what?
Yeah.
I'm putting my palm knife forward. I'm like, I've been running around hospitals at night dealing with elderly altered patients, and I could have fixed 1/3 of them with a glass of water. And do you see like how stupendously humbling that is? And so,
Yeah.
yes,
But that is what happens because
yes,
somebody falls on the floor and they're there
yes.
for a couple of days and they don't drink anything and
So here's one of my big teaching points in the ICU is I would go to my because I was like a house guy, right? I had students, residents, fellows, nurses, dietitians all surrounding me as I would go bed to bed, and so I was always teaching. And one of my questions would be like I'd ask the trainees, I'd say, when you have an LOL FOF, remember that term from the little old lady found on floor. I said, so when and I practiced in New York City, right, which was really common, right? So super doesn't see Mrs. Smith for 3 days, knocks on the door, lets himself in, and she's on the ground, right? They call an ambulance, and the next thing you know, she's in my ICU. And so I would ask the students, I'd say, what is the most common reason for altered mental status in an elderly, found on floor? And they would all say stroke, fall, heart attack, all these things. I said, not even close. It's actually infection, right? So they get a little delirious from infection when you're older. Your brain doesn't deal
right?
with infection, so they get altered. You're right. I didn't never keyed in on the fact that also it makes them weak. They can't get to water, and sometimes they fall. They can't get up. They're too weak, and then they're dehydrated. So you get them really dehydrated. We had to do more than hydration with them. Typically, it was pretty a severe infection, and so you'd have to treat the infection and hydrate them. But
Yeah.
they'd come around for sure. So anyway, I
Yeah.
just I like that part.
I mean, sometimes just a cystitis, a urinary tract
Oh yeah,
infection.
100%. A UTI in New York City in an elderly woman, they put a lot of those in the ICU, and it's like touch of antibiotic and a touch of fluids, and you're right as rain. So it's sometimes not that complicated, right? The ICU, but anyway, so I learned about how we really do not have a sufficient evidence base in terms of the physiologic necessity of a diverse set of trace minerals. So that's number one. Then the other thing, which also, I had so many palm to forehead moments when doing this research. So I came across a paper, and I don't know where they came up with this estimate, but they estimated that there's 16,000 enzymes in the human body. And then in the paper, they state that as of today, we've only characterized something around 1,600. So you're
Hmm.
talking about the 10% of the total enzymatic activity in the human body, only 10% has been well characterized. And of that 10%, 300 have critical metal mineral cofactors. And so I'm sitting there, so wait, what are the possibilities here? If 90% of the enzymes, we don't even know what they need or which one they need, whether it's essential or not, just to function, like what happens when you present the body with an extract of this diverse set of basically every possible physiologic active mineral that you can? And so I'm seeing these huge like gaps. I use the term black hole, in a couple of my chapters because I'm finding these black holes in science. Um, and so it was like it was one of the most transformative experiences. This book, I just every time I went deeper and deeper, I found potential for everything. And then you get to Shimanishi, right? And so I do talk about earlier visionaries, people who throughout last century had been like sort of what I do in my life is scream from the sidelines, about the toxicity and the benefits of certain, which is what CHD does, right? I kind of think about this, Meryl, as like, I call it private knowledge, right? And I think of that with CHD. They are like the greatest disseminator of private. Now, why do I call it private knowledge? Because it's not mainstream. You have to go to CHD to hear it. It's not on Channel 4. It's not on the New York Times. Like it's not in what is commonly known, but we reside in these areas of private knowledge. And I'm finding that same thing with the mineral experts. They've been screaming for, decades about the importance of minerals in terms of preventing disease. Linus Pauling, although he's apparently misattributed this quote, it probably was a little bit how should I say contrived, but his work really did focus on supporting this. But he's said to have quoted that you can trace every illness, every symptom, every disease to a trace mineral deficiency. And he said that back in like the 70s and 80s. And
Hmm.
I can't tell you how much I love Linus Pauling in terms of what he did for science and medicine. He's a fellow IVC, intravenous vitamin C zealot. So I kind of identify with him. But so I learned all these things, and many people, naturopaths, various interested nutritional experts, some of the books that they've written, that's first what opened up this. I read like a book called The Untold Truth by a guy named Elmer Heinrich, and I was riveted. In fact, I read it in one sitting. Like I couldn't let it down, and I was just that kind of was like one of my gateway drug into the minerals was this one book, and so anyway. Then you get to Shimanishi, and then the story just goes big. It was just tremendous. So I guess I should tell that story. So Asao Shimanishi was an engineer. He had training in mining and chemistry, apparently. He did other stuff outside of mining, but the story goes that it was passed down. This is an oral history through people I know connected to Japan and the company that is his legacy. But he was meditating, he was in his 30s, he was meditating on a beach, and he looks out and he sees this rock with a tree growing out of it. And there's no soil, no water. It's just a rock and a tree, and the tree is flourishing. And, I believe that left him with a really strong thought that I think drove him for the rest of his life, which is that he felt that there must be an underlying energy and a vitality in that rock, and he sought about how to extract the minerals from it. And it was a particular type of rock. It's called black mica, which is formed by volcanoes and volcanic ash deposits. And it has a particular unique chemical crystal lattice structure. And the first thing he did is he tried to apply heat to it. And guess what? Didn't work. It just like popped off into something called vermiculite. And he tried many different methods. He built furnaces, he studied volcanic processes, and it took him 20 years of persistent experimenting. And what happened is he developed a method with a certain amount of heat and a certain amount of sulfuric acid, and it rendered a liquid mineral extract from this black mica rock. And the reason why, and I probably skipped over this, the reason why I think that is a historic achievement, and I think it will be known in history. And without sounding grandiose, Meryl, I really do hope this book gets the attention it deserves because I'm not the guy who invented it. I'm the guy who's disseminating it. And this is not about me, but this story is big. You got to know something about black mica rock and volcanoes. If you, and I'm sure you know everything, Meryl, so I'm not going to tell you anything you know, but if you know anything about early life science, right? Early life science has determined that the first forms of cellular life on this planet developed in the deep undersea floor where hydrothermal volcanic vents were spewing black ash. And that ash was rich in mineral, particularly rich in iron and sulfur, which are literally the foundation of living beings, particularly sulfur, but a host of other minerals. And the way in which, now that I know about mineral science, and Meryl, I take my hat off to you if you got through the science chapters where I go deep into biochemistry, even though
No, no, I skimmed those.
you skim
But
those. Okay. Well,
but it's important for people to understand that there are microbes, there are bacteria and other microorganisms at the bottom of the ocean where there's no sun.
Yes.
And I'm not even sure whether all of them use carbon or not, but they live in a way that, our scientific knowledge has a very hard time explaining.
Yes. Well, that's what I go into those. If you ever have the appetite to go back and go deep, and I do invite the reader because I understand many people are lay people. I have them skip the deep science chapters to a layperson summary. But when you go deep into the science, you learn that how life was created was through this unique composition of a different ratio of concentrations of particular minerals, right? About five or six or seven that when they interact with each other, they were able to capture and shuttle protons. Protons is the primary energy source of everything. It's really the gradients of protons, which then drive electron flow. And when a proton interacts with electron, a little energy is released. That is literally the basic unit of everything living, is this proton gradient. Secondary is electron flow and energy release. And so this matrix of minerals supported this, became like nature's first battery and conductor of energy, was just a matrix of minerals in the deep, deep sea. Like you just said, Meryl, no sunlight. And once they saw that energy could be not only contained, but shuttled and moved, that's where there's another step where an amino acid was produced from that. So that's the second unit of like life and energy is an amino acid, and then protein, then cell membrane, whatever. But there's also a famous experiment. They did this in the 1950s where they took volcanic ash and I think put electricity to it, and it literally produced an amino acid. They did this in the lab. They like
Wow.
literally recreated the origin. And by the way, we're talking about 3.5 billion years ago that this happened. And so let's go back to Shimanishi. In 1970s, this guy, after 20 years of going at this rock to try to get its minerals, it's produced in a liquid mineral extract with a full complement of about 80 ultra trace rare earth, major, minor, essential, non-essential. There's many different categorization schemes, but I think it was a remarkable achievement. And the story from there in terms of how the knowledge of this has gotten out, how some of the effects of supplementation, and can I put in a disclaimer here, Meryl,
Um,
or not?
Probably better
Okay.
not to.
Anyway, the various this extract has been used in various fashions and forms for not only water purification but also for supplementation. Those are two different applications. You
Human
only need,
supplementation.
what's that?
Human supplementation.
Yeah, humans. Oh, not even human. We're talking animal, plants, agriculture. So one of the first products that became very popular in Japan was not only being used to treat illness in higher doses, still within dietary range limits, but they were seeing really impressive impacts on a broad diversity of illness. But also the farmers started using in Japan. Golf courses started using. They were growing like some of the best grass. The farmers would report that their need for pesticides, the yields, the vigor of these plants would increase. animals. There's stories about Shimanishi was raising eels. And if you know anything about I don't know much, but I looked into it. The market for eels and sushi in Japan is not based on weight like it is here. It's based on quality of the fish. And he had very high quality eels that he would farm in his tanks. And I've heard that elsewhere. I mean, the potential for aquaculture, for agriculture, for livestock. I talk a lot about that trace mineral depletion that's occurred in our soils has been very well observed by farmers, people who farmed
Yes.
for decades. I mean, the health and vigor of a cow in 1950, they didn't need supplementation. Now, the livestock that's being raised, they're constantly having to supplement them. And so this is like a major, when you're talking about health with a capital H, I think this is a really major component and contributor that needs more focus. And at least that was what my passion obsession led
So
to.
let me interrupt you with a couple of
Yeah.
things. One is, as I told Pierre, I have bought a product for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, two different products, which are simply trace minerals. And what are they called? I forget what they're called, but they're powders, and I just spread them in my garden. And I have an intuition that that makes my plants grow better. I can't prove it, and I
Well,
haven't done a controlled
Mel,
experiment. So that's one thing.
I gotta ask you though, because you skimmed, because you only got the book a few days before this interview, and I know you did look at it, but the actually in the Shimanishi chapter, I show a side by side, quote unquote, tabletop experiment where a colleague took two potatoes, put some toothpicks in it, and submerged it in the top of a glass.
Yes,
There's water. Did you see that picture of
I
that?
did. So
Yeah.
one potato got rotten and one potato grew a huge stalk. But I mean,
Unbelievable.
some potatoes do get rotten. I grow potatoes.
Well,
So
when you mineralize the water, they flourished with a vitality that you couldn't believe. Now, you brought up a mineral product that you use. One thing I skipped over in terms of Shimanishi's achievement, which is really important. So, not only did he successfully figure out a method to extract this, I think it's a primordial mineral complex, but that mineral complex was rendered ionic and sulfated, meaning all the minerals are charged and they have a sulfate group, which means they're dissolvable. So you're talking about a complex that is, I think, has
now how did that
unparalleled, hold
happen?
on, let me just finish, unparalleled
Sure.
bioavailability and bioactivity. That's what I think about these particular minerals.
How did it come to be that they're all sulfated?
Because he used sulfuric acid in his process. That was his
I
that was like
see.
that was the and but there's no sulfuric acid, that's battery acid, right? And that's actually when we
It's
if we
also
get
in
to
our
that,
stomach.
yeah, it's our hydrochloric acid's in our stomach. Yeah, we
Sorry.
acid is a thing. But that's what rendered them all sulfated, is because he used sulfuric acid to actually achieve that extraction. And it turned out to be, it was like, I don't want to, dumb it down to like a peanut butter and chocolate, discovery, but it was absolutely serendipitous, and it produced what I think is one of the most unique sources of minerals in the world. I even have a chapter where I go over the kind of strengths and weaknesses and benefits of various mineral sources. There's kind of five. There's seawater, which is really so seawater minerals derived. There's seaweed derived. There's lake brine, plant mineral derived, and then there's obviously humic and fulvic. And I did a deep dive into the relative sort of strengths and weaknesses, and I couldn't find anything that can do what Shimanishi's extract can do.
Well, it certainly sounded as if the sulfation was a
Yes,
critical part of this.
for
I
sure.
want to mention one other thing is I live near Acadia National Park, and if you go there, you can find a lot of trees growing in rocks. So that's not something unique, and I don't know what the rain brings to these, rocks that have cracks in them and plants grow in them, but it's quite amazing. Now, a lot of those rocks were probably dropped, in the when the where were they going backwards during the ice age,
Right.
as the ice age receded, and glaciers, were moving or melting, these rocks were left behind. So they may have some special properties. They may not have been located near where I am. Oh my goodness, Lou's finding
Yeah,
ridges from
it's Lucy.
Acadia National Park.
That was cool. Um,
Um,
but no, you're right about there's different, I don't, there's also this chapter where I go into what's called balneal therapy, which
mhm.
is basically, hot spring bathing. And I was shocked at the amount of studies. There's study after study after study in a variety of conditions where after immersing, people immerse themselves in these hot springs, most of them fed by volcanoes, most of them mineral rich, and most of them uniquely mineral rich in terms of having this broad enrichment of the minerals whose names you've never heard of. That's another point that I make in the book is that like there's dozens of minerals and elements that no one has ever heard the names of, and yet they could be critical to our physiology. And so when you see the results, they're basically all uniformly positive. I mean, of varying magnitudes, but every balneal therapy study in any condition shows improvements. One
Okay,
of
so
them,
I wanna add a couple of things.
yeah,
One is my great grandfather used to go to Saratoga Springs for
yes.
health, back around 1900. So
Oh, wow, that
and
back then
people are
already. Ah,
people are still going to these hot springs for health purposes. Now, another thing, I once had ants in my kitchen and I decided I'd be clever and I made a solution of borax and I took my hands and a cloth and I wiped down all the countertops and the floor and everything with the borax solution to stop the ants. Well, a few hours later, I could taste the borax in my mouth. And borax is 21% boron.
right.
And for several days, I could taste the borax in my
Just from
mouth.
inhaling the dust that
I
that
think
is
it
in.
was through the skin. I mean, I
Oh, and you
wasn't
can taste
boiling
it
it.
from skin absorption. Oh,
I think it was skin absorption. So that's an example of why going to a mineral spring and immersing your body into it may actually lead to absorption of
oh,
minerals.
I know of a practitioner who that's part of her therapy at her clinic. She's created a mineral bath with higher dose concentration minerals and has reported repeated reliable benefits over decades. But the studies themselves, like this one from Ethiopia, where they did like a 1,600 person survey of people who bathed for 3 days straight in these volcanic rock fed hot mineral springs in Ethiopia. 83% reported complete pain relief from chronic, I think it was arthritis, knee arthritis, and similarly high number with low back pain. And so, like, now can you see, Meryl, how, like, as I'm like turning each page, I'm just like, what am I finding? What am I finding in terms of the potential for minerals to
Yes.
nourish and hopefully relieve various symptoms and conditions. And so I think the future is going to be really exciting around that. But yeah, the balneal therapy is interesting. Now, here's a big question. Now I'm asking you questions, Meryl, about my book. Did you get to my analysis of the shrine at Lourdes?
I did.
And should I tell the audience about that analysis?
Sure.
Yeah, so many people are familiar with the Shrine at Lourdes. It's in the south of France near the Spanish border. And it's a famous Catholic pilgrimage site. Millions of people, of Catholics, visit that shrine, many who are ill, for relief or salvation or whatever, or for cure. And they have been for about almost 200 years now. More people visit the Shrine at Lourdes than the Taj Mahal every year, which is kind of a shocking
Wow.
stat. And throughout those decades, there have been 72 officially declared Catholic miracles. I had to learn what that was. I did know that they would proclaim miracles here and there, but I didn't know what was behind it or the process behind it. But essentially, it's the case of someone who has a documented, verified, recorded chronic, disabling, debilitating illness, and then visits the shrine. These are the criteria that the case has to meet in order to be declared as a miracle. And so you have to have this documented history, then a documented visit to the shrine, and then followed by a complete and lasting recovery. And there's even a medical committee, the International Medical Committee of Lourdes, who's assigned the task of doing the deep review of the case and everything that happened. And when it passes their examination, and basically, if they are led to the conclusion that there's no possible medical explanation for this recovery, it's declared a miracle. And there have been 72 officially declared miracles. And then there's been something like 7,000,
Okay,
undocumented.
but they don't just go to the Shrine of Lords, they do something else.
Well, yeah. So actually, that's a very good point. So in the vast majority, but not totality, Meryl, though your point is really good, they either immerse, drink, or soak some part of their body in the water at the shrine. Um, there are some miracles that I came across because, fun fact, I read through the 72 miracles. But the cases and the patterns of recoveries are so reliable. But there are some cases where it does not involve the water at Lourdes at all, and I have my own theories on some of those. But the vast majority, it's some sort of exposure to the water in some fashion. And so I went through all these miracles, and then obviously, as a researcher, quote unquote, scientist, physician, obviously the question is there something unique about the water at Lourdes? And already back in the 1860s, they tried to do an analysis of the water, and they found it unremarkable in any way. Now, their measurement tools at that time were primitive. It was looked at again in like the 30s and 40s, again, unremarkable. And I will tell you, I discovered this probably only because artificial intelligence exists. I don't think I would have found out this information otherwise, but I asked AI because I knew that ICP-MS, right, is that sophisticated device that can look and measure concentrations of these rare earth elements and ultra trace minerals.
Can,
And
can
so
you tell the audience what those letters stand for? ICP?
I forget the ICP is the MS is mass spectrometry, and the ICP is some method. It's some application of some
Okay.
subtype of a mass spectrometer. Sorry if I didn't recall that, but I've just been used to rattling off ICP-MS. Oh,
There you
inductively
go.
coupled. Thank you, Lou. All right.
Lou is
Lou,
ahead of
if you'd
us
done
all
that
the
maybe
time.
5 seconds ago, you would have saved me. Inductively coupled plasma. But so I asked AI, has the water at Lords ever undergone an ICP-MS analysis? And they pulled a paper from a Polish geochemical journal. I'm sure you have one on your kitchen table. You probably do, Meryl, because you're a nerd. But I found this Polish geochemical journal, and it was fascinating because as I've accused other doctors, sometimes I'm guilty of this too, but I'm sometimes an ARP. You know what an ARP is, Meryl? It's an abstract reading physician. They just read the abstract and move
I'm one
on.
of those.
And that's how pharma gets all of their stuff done. They just put stuff in the abstract conclusion and their little propaganda message. You get how it works.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I am sometimes an ARP, especially when it comes to Polish geochemical journals. And I read the conclusion, and it basically reports there was nothing unique about the water in their analysis. And I'm like, what? There goes my hypothesis. But guess what? As I keep researching around this topic, I kept getting led back to this paper. I finally open it up and I read it. Imagine doing that, Meryl, finding something in the paper that's not in the abstract.
How amazing.
I'm falling for this, when the rest of the country's doctors fall for it every day. So I go to the paper and they found an incredibly unique enrichment of the most rarest of minerals. And what was so great about this paper is not only did they look at the water at the shrine, but they compared it to 3 other springs in the area, and it was unique amongst all those other bodies of water. And then the rock formations that feed it, it's a little bit debatable, but I read one paper which isn't supported by others, but there's certain volcanic and geologic formations. It's a very complex geology around that spring, but I don't care. That paper showed that it had a truly unique footprint. So then I asked myself, why isn't it in the abstract? After 150 years of miracles, they found something that's distinctive about this water, and they don't put it in the abstract. And I'm going to hypothesize a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I think this stems from what we were talking about earlier about the black hole in science around minerals, is that there's no documented pharmacologic, mechanisms attributed to these rare earth minerals. So, It can't be anything
Right,
biologically or physical, so
right.
that's one, is that there's a bias that we don't know. And then two is they didn't want to rock the boat like I did in my chapter, which is basically, I think the section of that chapter is called Miracles or Minerals. So like, I even wrote a little note to the Pope. I was like, hey, Pope, if I'm right, why don't you fund some research into this and maybe, and someone told me that's a Catholic, they said, Pierre, you're not going to be labeled a heretic. They will actually accept that and basically interpret that as a way in which God has intervened in certain people's lives. And keep in mind, it's 72 miracles, right? And millions of people have met. So I think there's a certain symbiosis or synergy in certain people. I think they have to. We know how our psychological states, play a big role in how we heal and recover and function. And I think, my sense is that those minerals and well, actually, let me finish the story. So after I like cracked the case on, or I think I did, I wanted more data. So again, using AI, because I don't think anyone could have physically done this, but I asked AI to find me. First, I'd asked two things. Find me every spring that has been associated with healing recoveries in the world. And it immediately generated a list of 203 springs littered on every continent across the planet. Um, and I said, which one of those 203 is there evidence that they underwent ICP-MS analysis? And there's three other springs. And all of the analyses showed the same thing, a unique enrichment of trace, ultra trace, and rare earth elements in those waters. And so, my head's exploding at my desk at like 11 o'clock at night. I'm just like, this is wild. And so, anyway, that part of the story I just found transformative. And then, oh, wait, and then I even include a couple of cases in these other springs. Where different hikers like who've gone to the springs with like an ailment and an ache or a spring. One guy had like drop foot and he went for a little dip in the mineral and he noticed when he came out of the bath, like his drop foot had gone and he was walking
Yes.
normally. There's all sorts of cat, and those go back centuries. I mean, come on, your or was it great grandfather Merrill? In
Great
1900
grandfather.
was already seeking out mineral immersion for relief of ailments, I guess, or whatever, just health in general. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, before there was modern medicine, right? There were hot springs.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? I like that you brought that up because I actually am working on a chapter which is going to be added to the book before it goes to the printer because I learned about this guy. Have you ever heard about Rene Quinton? Ever heard
No.
his name before? So he's a guy from the early 1900s, and brilliant guy. The more I read about him, I'm just so in awe. He was actually a famous soldier. He fought for 4.5 years straight in World War One in like 30 battles. He won like every commendation on the battlefield, like just his military career alone. And he got like distinguished crosses from many of the allies too, not only just his country in France, but then his interest in biology led him, and he became fascinated with seawater, particularly its mineral composition. And he noticed that it had the same mineral composition as blood, as the plasma. And he kind of saw this repeat or this connection between seawater and blood. And so he developed a mineral concentrate, a seawater injection, and he would inject. And he actually did fairly careful studies for that time. Obviously, not perfectly randomized. Obviously, that was kind of before the obsession with randomized controlled trials, but they're good studies. He did do things in sequence, and you could show and measure changes, particularly in like malnourished, dying young children, infants. I mean, he was routinely resuscitating them back to life with these seawater injections, which were rich in minerals. And so his story is just kind of fascinating around the potential.
So you started out talking about the fact that there's been a lot of research into the toxic effects of some of these minerals, not much into their therapeutic effects. I want to say that plants are the mechanism by which we can be saved from the toxic effects. So we can put a lot of minerals, for instance, into the soil or a foliar spray, and the plants will take up what's good for them and leave the bad ones behind. And if we eat then the plant, we will definitely, pretty much definitely get a safe combination of minerals from the plant.
100%, Meryl. So part of my research, I've been just blessed to meet and discuss and learn from people who've been working and studying, particularly Shimanishi's minerals for about 20 years. And his extract, he called it Thema Rocks, Themarox. And that's the company that imports it here in the US. And their main customer base is literally the Amish throughout the Midwest. That's one of their major ones. And so the
Wow.
Amish have figured it out, and they love these minerals. Apparently, they use it for not only pastures to grow hay, but various other things. And going back to that potato experiment, when you see what happened to the two potatoes, one is, did you see the rich network of clear roots underneath the potato
Yes.
and the mineralized water?
Yes.
And the other
But I
one's
mean, it was an
dying.
N of one, and potatoes do rot. And so,
Well, that one wasn't rotting, and well, yes,
no,
I
I
mean,
know. But I mean, if I store potatoes for the winter, a few of them will rot during
well,
the
I'm not,
storage.
I'm not basing my assertion on a potato experiment. I mean, these, when applied in agriculture, repeatedly and reliably, farmers report really dramatic impacts in terms of vigor, yield, resistance to pests. That's the other problem.
Right.
That
And the
rapid.
Amish in the Midwest are in an area not far from the ocean, and they are definitely short on iodine and other minerals
Yep.
because they're not near the ocean. I mean, historically, the people who got goiters were people who lived in the mountains, and the people
Yes.
on the shore who ate the fish or used the seaweed. And by the way, there are companies just down the street from where I live that collect seaweed from the ocean here in Maine and dry it and sell it. And it has a variety of minerals.
It's
So
You're so brilliant on picking that up, and I love that you're focusing on just one or two minerals. And it's like you can actually create a list. And like, so I have one chapter where I dig deep on lithium boron and then copper. The amount of published science papers, Meryl, on how copper is implicated in so many diseases, cardiovascular disease, particularly copper
wow.
deficiency, is almost uniformly associated with almost all cardiovascular disease. And that's just a single mineral. And then you go into what did I else want to say about copper? Yeah, so copper is a big one. Lithium. Well, oh, you were talking. Wait, I just had a thought and I lost it.
It was iodine.
I wanted to talk about this other thing. So all these vistas of looking into health and biology kept happening for me. So this thing that we've been talking about so far in this hour, trace mineral deficiency, is accompanied by another process happening to our soil, which is heavy metal excess. And so I even
Ah, yes.
came up with an acronym in my book. I called it TMD HME, trace mineral deficiency, heavy metal excess. And I start to find papers in literally any disease category. You can find a paper which has found the combination of trace mineral deficiency and heavy metal excess. And there's a reason for that. It's not just what's happening in the soil. It's actually being driven by trace mineral deficiency. Because once you start getting deficient trace minerals, your body literally substitutes the heavy metals. There's like a competitive absorption thing going on. And if you can't
Yes.
compete with the heavy metals, your body's going to take it up. So trace mineral deficiency literally is another defense against the toxins, which is you want to have it so that you're keeping that absorption at bay. And there's plenty of evidence showing that trace mineral repletion reduces heavy metals through a couple of other mechanisms. And so, but when I looked at the breadth of diseases in which they found that combination, it's basically every category of disease known that I could see. I came up with 54 different diseases across 12 different categories of disease, paper after paper, TMD, HME. So it's
Yeah.
truly
So
remarkable.
I think you've really hit on something. I do believe we are deficient in minerals. I agree with you. When I went to med school, they said the only part of your body that uses iodine is thyroid hormone, nothing else. And then listening to David Brownstein, Dr. David Brownstein, he's telling me that all these other endocrine organs are also in some way using iodine,
No,
maybe
that's the
the
point,
hormone.
right? And you're keying in on that. Like the research just isn't there. Like here's the other example that I was shocked, right? Going back to the essential argument. Do you know that selenium and molybdenum were considered poisons for a long
Right.
time? And then
Right.
suddenly, particularly in the case of
And so selenium is, if you too much selenium is poisonous
yes,
and
but
not
it's
enough
not all
selenium
poison.
is
I mean, we
poison
know
is
the
bad for
dose.
you.
Yeah. we know the dose makes the poison, but my point is not that they didn't figure out the dose, is that it was considered a poison, and now it landed itself on the essentials list. And
Right.
my hypothesis is that if effort and attention and funding go into exploring the impacts of these minerals, that essentials list is going to grow. Nels is already making the argument that lithium should be on there, and I believe it. And looking at the research of lithium deficiency, it's repeatedly associated with increased psychiatric visits, suicides, like with water
Yes,
with decent
exactly.
lithium
It just
content,
makes sense.
Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline. It's all associated with lithium deficiency, and that's just one mineral.
Okay, Pierre, we have almost no time left, and I
Okay.
want to ask you about, give us the, in a nutshell, chlorine dioxide.
The War on Chlorine Dioxide. Notice it's the second in my similarly titled series, right? And it's sort of the same story, right? My first book, The War on Ivermectin, was a massive global disinformation campaign. The one on chlorine dioxide is, I think, in ways much more vicious, which way more negative impacts because it is so inexpensive, widely available, not by prescription. And that campaign has been going on for decades. I'll give you, because you're a bioweapons expert, Meryl, a little factoid, but Vladimir Pasechnik, who was like the main bioweaponeer for Russia, he was, what do you call it when you help a science escape? Not extradite.
Yes, right.
Defect. So American intelligence got him to defect. He did his research in the UK, and he had been doing research with chlorine dioxide, and he had called it the universal antidote to all bioweapons.
Hmm.
That's known already back in
Whoa.
the 80s and 90s by the Russian bioweapons. So that book hits something really important.
So what does it do?
Chlorine dioxide is an oxidative therapy, so it sits in the category of ozone, hydrogen peroxide, ultraviolet blood irradiation, anything that oxidizes. Essentially, it's the ultimate biocide. It will kill any pathogen in the body, not hurt the microbiome because it's weakly oxidizing. It's just strong enough to kill pathogens without disturbing or vaulting the antioxidant defenses that our microbiome has. So it's like this brilliantly safe, highly effective. It's literally the answer for so many ills in medicine, like MDR organisms, multi-drug resistant organisms, so many different infections. In fact, I think this is going to sound grandiose. Well, it's not about me being grandiose, but it sounds like a very dramatic statement. But I think it would end the specialty of infectious disease.
Woo, that's
That's a
quite a
pretty big
statement.
statement. But I would love for someone to give
Silver
me a
is
compelling
pretty good
argument
at
as to why I'm wrong. Sorry about that.
killing
Go ahead.
microorganisms also.
What's that?
Silver.
Silver's very good at that too. Yes, exactly. But I don't know that you could use silver in the same way that you can use chlorine dioxide. And the reason
Oh,
why chlorine dioxide is such a threat and ozone isn't, is that it's orally ingested. You can buy it on Amazon for $20.
uh,
Ozone, you need like a practitioner, a machine, and expertise, and all that. It's not scalable, and that's why this thing is a big, big threat. And so I've become an expert at looking at victims of pharma disinformation campaigns and writing exposés. It's a cottage industry of mine now.
yeah. Yes. Yeah, we both have a bit of that.
Oh yeah, you've been doing it longer than I have, Meryl. So I'm a newbie. Anyway,
And I guess we'll have to buy both of your books.
please.
Or if you're a subscriber, he is releasing the chapters on his
Well, yeah, actually, I
Substack.
published it on Substack. So a paid subscriber will have access to the table of contents and they can read the whole book today. I also I named this month Mineral Month, and I'm releasing a chapter a day throughout the month because I think some of these chapters are pretty heavy and people may want to just remember Tolstoy and Dickens used to publish serial fashion, right, in magazines and journals, and so I'm doing it on Substack in the modern day, a chapter a day for Mineral Month.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
definitely.
Thank you so much, Pierre.
Awesome, Meryl.
Hopefully we will have learned a lot, and I'm going to pay much more attention to minerals myself after
Love it.
this.
I'm glad to hear it. It's good to see you, Meryl. I'll see you in Austin.
Yes,
Definitely.
take good care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Oh, we're live. Tell us your name.
My name is Marie.
Marie. Okay, so this is about shedding, and
Yes.
shedding is real. So, Did you take the COVID-19 shot?
I did not, no.
Did not. But your injury, you have an injury story as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. So back in the fall of 2018, I took a flu shot, and it just so happened that I had some blood work following that within a week or two. And it turned out that I had extremely high thyroid antibodies. So I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's shortly after the vaccine. So that was kind of my first clue that maybe those things were not as safe as they claimed to be. So I started searching a lot of that. And so when COVID came around, I became a little bit suspicious that maybe this was a little too rushed to market. And so I didn't take the vaccine, but my husband did. He had the 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine in, I believe it was April of 2021. And shortly after that, I had this massive bleeding happen to the point where I was weak. I struggled with just going downstairs, for example. I would look at stairs and go, if I pass out in a staircase, I mean, I can't imagine, the damage that you do with your body rolling down the stairs. So it started putting a lot of things in question when you go through that amount of blood loss. And at first, my doctor didn't believe me. It was like, no, I don't, I haven't heard of that, Marie. Like, no. And then, so he started me on all sorts of hormone therapy to be able to stop the bleeding. So at first, it was 10 days of progesterone. It stopped it during the time that I was taking it, but as soon as I got off of it, the whole thing started over again. And for weeks on end, I would bleed some more. Then he put me on the pill, so I was on the pill for 3 weeks. And of course, when you get off the pill, the bleeding starts again, as it should be. But then it kept on going, and finally, I'm like, what am my recourse at this point? And it just crazy situation. My husband goes on a business trip to Seattle, comes back, and I think it was sometime in July or August. He comes back so sick, and I'm like, oh, for sure you got COVID. You're on an airplane, you went to meet a bunch of people over there. So because a lot of people like myself who were a little bit like, we need some therapies. If we're not going to get a shot, how do we get out ourselves from getting really sick? So I got the ivermectin. So I had that in my back pocket in case something happened. So when he came back really sick, I gave him some ivermectin. I gave myself some ivermectin in case he was going to get me sick. And lo and behold, 2 days later, bleeding completely stopped.
After the ivermectin?
Completely stopped. I kid you not. It was like a miracle. And the more I researched it afterwards, because I told my doctor, I'm like, how is this possible? And then it came out, and I forget when it was, but they figured, probably I think it was the following year, where the ivermectin somehow binds to the spike proteins or prevents it from docking or something of that nature. And so I'm like, well, that's why it works so effectively to stop what was going on. Now, I still don't know from everything that I've read whether it's damage to the pituitary gland or it's kind of an attack on the lining of the uterus. There's still so much unknown about that phenomena. So that's what happened.
Stopped even now today.
It's I went back after the ivermectin. I went back to a completely different, typical cycle for 2 years. A lot of my friends were like, well, Marie, you're getting up close to that age, and so maybe you're perimenopausal. Same thing, my doctor said that too, and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird that I got a regular period for 2 years after that happened. So I was not in that phase when it happened.
Your husband, does he understand now not to take any more of the COVID shot?
He stopped. He never took any boosters after that because I made him realize that there were a lot of risks for him to take it because we started getting a lot of reports on the myocarditis. But then I said, it seems like I'm very allergic to a lot of things just naturally. I'm allergic to so many plants, some foods, and I was like, if I'm this sensitive, maybe you should stop taking these kind of shots because I'm going to get injured again. So he's never taken another mRNA shot after that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to this?
I've read some more of the medical literature regarding the shedding phenomena, and it seems like now there's always that debate of shedding occurs according to a 2015 study from the CDC that says, well, there is this shedding phenomena that happens with gene editing products. And then the whole debate started happening with, oh, well, the vaccine is not really a gene editing product. It is a gene therapeutic. And I think Pfizer, as far as I know, when they filed for their emergency use authorization, they did use these terms. And so I think there's a lot of, right now, fact checkers are saying shedding doesn't occur because we don't have the literature. But the whole premise behind that is because they changed the vaccine definition. They removed the word antigen to cause an immune response in humans because it no longer fit that definition of what the mRNA type vaccines do. And so the shedding is real, and it all depends on how you define what a vaccine is. And really, these shots are not vaccines. They are gene therapies at a very minimum. And now the debate is how much of the nanoparticles that are tied to that technology actually cause gene editing itself and not just gene expression, which is slightly different. So that I'm looking into that because it kind of fascinates me, and I don't want it to be repeated, and I want to be an advocate for safer products. And the more I know about it, the more I can talk to people about it. So,
well, thank you. Thank you for sitting here and telling us your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Some 40 to 70% of mothers who have children with autism believe that their child was injured by a vaccine. We should be listening to these mothers. We will perform the studies that should have been performed 25 years ago.
This is the most important thing. There's nothing more important than that.
This guy is staking his presidency on ending the autism epidemic, and he talked about vaccines.
We want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine.
We didn't know if he was actually going to touch on vaccines, and he was all over it.
There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B.
He basically gave parents permission not to vaccinate their kids and definitely not to take Tylenol.
We now have data we cannot ignore. There is a causal relationship between prenatal acetaminophen use and neurodevelopmental disorders of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder.
The truth is, vaccine injuries are real and they've been ignored.
Society does not want to acknowledge vaccine injury, period.
These childhood vaccinations, the people of America are telling us they are not safe and effective. We are seriously concerned at Children's Health Defense about the disinformation and misinformation out there.
The government has decided that this particular industry doesn't have to be liable to anybody.
There's only 10% of children are complying with the CDC's recommendation on COVID boosters.
A record number of kindergartners didn't get at least one state-mandated vaccine.
And the number of exemptions is up.
Vaccination rates in children start to drop once again.
A 16-year-old girl wins in court after the public school system denied her medical vaccine exemption.
The nonprofit Children's Health Defense has championed her case.
Sarah Joe is going to be going to
Health and Human Services is reestablishing the task force on safer childhood vaccines. This comes after a lawsuit from an advocacy group formerly led by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.